Hello, everyone. My name is Martin Vallière. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Computer Science at the University of Sherbrooke in Quebec. And it's a great pleasure for me to give this presentation today to you, MICCAI attendees, give you the presentation about radiomics and more specifically, the Image Biomarker Standardization Initiative. So before starting describing what is the Image Biomarker Standardization Initiative, let me first give a bit of concepts, again, about radiomics. So the first hypothesis of radiomics is basically that the genomic heterogeneity of aggressive tumors could translate into heterogeneous characteristics at the anatomical scale, and that this heterogeneity at the anatomical scale could be captured using quantitative image analysis. So when a patient presents to the hospital, there's many different kind of information that are acquired, gathered by physicians to take the best treatment decision possible. One of them is about imaging. Imaging, which could give information, one of the hypotheses about the aggressiveness of tumors, about intratumoral heterogeneity. If we can quantify this intratumoral heterogeneity, this could give us a surrogate of tumor aggressiveness. For example, you see here an image of a soft tissue sarcoma of the leg, an MRI image. You clearly see that there are different subregions within this tumor, differences between the different subregions, different regions of necrosis, of oxygenation levels, different blood vasculature. Overall, this heterogeneity, that's the main goal here in radiomics, to try to quantify this. So if I can go with a general definition of radiomics, I would say that it's the characterization of tumor phenotypes, so the behavior of tumors, via the extraction of high-dimensional miniable data from all types of medical images. And the subsequent goal of radiomics is to support clinical decision-making. Okay, and the general process, as you probably know now, first it starts with imaging, obviously, and there's that crucial step here that we're the main focus of this session here, about the segmentation of the tumor itself, here in green, so that we can extract from this subregion all the features required to do our analysis, all the features required to have an assessment of intratumoral heterogeneity, eventually tumor aggressiveness. You can do then afterward machine learning to try to quantify or model a given clinical endpoint, clinical outcome. It could be future development of metastases, for example. Is the tumor, and so different questions basically. Is the tumor more likely to locally recur? We can also analyze overall survival. Many different things can be done with these features, depending on the type of oncology problems that we're investigating. But again, these crucial steps here of segmentation is of the utmost importance to have the right features here at the end. So the example of features that can be extracted from radiomics analyses, for example, one of the main goals is always to differentiate between those responders, those patients that respond well to treatment, from those patients that do not respond well to treatment, basically giving a surrogate assessment of tumor aggressiveness here. We're trying to find the imaging features that best differentiate between these two classes of patients. And one of the subtype of radiomics type of features that can be extracted comes from texture analysis, which is concerned with the spatial distribution, the spatial patterns of breathable variations within an image. So the major objective, if I can reiterate this, of radiomics is, in the end, in my opinion, to do personalized treatment, to go towards precision medicine. In this radiomics world, basically, we do, as we previously said, imaging, segmentation, feature extraction, then analysis. What we want to ultimately build here is a prediction model. A prediction model that could be applied in the real clinical world, where a new patient would come in, obtain the same type of imaging from which the model was built, apply the prediction model, which could be a function of texture 1, texture 2, radiomics feature 1, 2, 3, 4, such that it can provide a better assessment of tumor aggressiveness and provide this information to doctors, physicians, so that they can better personalize treatment and go towards better precision medicine. So radiomics in itself could help to complement other types of precision medicine methods, basically. Towards precision, clinical translation, though, there's one basic requirement for this whole process to work, is that the model computation, the radiomix model computation, let's say we assume that we have a radiomix model, this computation of the model must be the same at hospital 1 than at other hospital 1 or 2. Back in 2016, we started to investigate if this was the case, basically, when given to different institutions features to compute based on the existing literature, based on literature from the 1980s, basically describing those features. And we found out that, yes, there are many different details that can link to a lot of variations between institutions here, I1, I2, I3, I4, for let's say five different classical features in texture analysis. Coefficient of variations as much as 100% between the different institutions, which is not acceptable, and because of that couldn't be applied in real clinical environments. So really the key to first go towards clinical translation, have radiomix model go towards clinical translation, is first of all the standardization. The first key here, standardization about how we compute radiomix features. And the key factors to clinical translation, as I said, first key is standardization of features. Then, in order to calibrate our code with some benchmarks for which the community would have agreed upon, transparency and quality of research methods in order for others to reproduce what we've done, and validation of those models, obviously, with independent testing, design of prospective studies based on those models, randomized clinical trials, and so on. The road ahead is long to implement some radiomix models that could help patients. And the first challenge, as I said, is about standardization of features. So there's different quality factors associated to radiomics studies, radiomics analyses. I invite you to read these papers, this paper here, which describe them in more detail. Different things to report that we need to report when we do radiomics studies and we publish in the literature so that others can reproduce our work, basically. So if I can reiterate, first key to clinical translation for radiomics is standardization of features calculated from some region of interest that could have been segmented by manual, semi-automatic, or automatic methods. We'll get back to that. So that's exactly the goal of the Image Biomarker Standardization Initiative, the IBSI. So the IBSI was formed in 2016, in September 2016. And as of now, consists of a group of approximately 75 scientists from approximately 25 institutions in about 10 countries in the world. So it's an ongoing work, still, yes, for which the major goal is really to standardize and benchmark radiomics feature computations in all the different forms that it can take. So the result of this first phase or first chapter, I would say, of the IBSI since 2016 was the creation of an exhaustive list of features, 173, that are mainly used in the literature by the community, and most importantly, benchmark results of calculation of those features on some specified images, some really specified, definite specified images. And this is all basically detailed, the way to compute features, the way to report how those features were calculated. It's all detailed and summarized into a reference manual of 169 pages. It's quite exhaustive there. So The first results of the IBSI that started in 2016, for which there was many iteration, many analysis time point for which we compared our results, our calculation of features on different specified imaging volumes. There was many iteration, took quite a lot of time. Many teams participated to this first chapter with different types of codes and different programming language. This all led to, with the great work of many of all the participants, it led to the publication of our work in radiology, the Radiology Journal, in March 2020. And then, not too long after that, we initiated the chapter 2 of the IBSI. So this work is always ongoing, will always be ongoing. There's always things to improve. And I'll talk a bit about IBSI chapter 2 at the end of this talk. For now, I will describe to you the results and the specifics of IBSI chapter 1, which is about the computation of the radiomics features themselves and how we must follow some type of guidelines, some types of workflow to be sure that the work we're doing, the radiomics features that we're computing after some segmentation, is benchmarked such that others can reproduce it, and eventually such that it can lead to clinical translation. So in itself, the chapter 1 of the Image Biomarker Standardization Initiative was again divided into 2 phases. Chapter 1 was divided into phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 was about benchmarking directly the image, the computation of image biomarkers of those radiomics features from a simple digital phantom without any image processing associated to it. So you see the spectrum where the IBSI lies. Basically, there's the image acquisition and reconstruction, the segmentation, then there's image processing, image biomarker computation, and eventually machine learning to be done in order to get a prediction model based on radiomics. The IBSI basically investigated 2 of these boxes. Phase 1 was about the computation of the features themselves, and once we benchmarked the way we computed the features themselves, we looked into image processing necessary to be performed in phase 2 before computing radiomics features from real-world medical imaging data. So in total, there was a number of biomarkers tested, 487, because there was different features computed in 2D or in 3D with different radiomics parameters merging versus averaging of directional texture matrices. So that created a total of 487 features that were tested. If I can take an exploded view of the digital phantom, that's what it looked like, basically. Very discrete intensity, very, very simple, basically. 4 by 5 by 5 size of the phantom, very small phantom, such that in the end we could find the ground truth of our calculations directly by calculating the features by hand from this phantom. The idea was to get the same benchmark results computationally between the different teams. That's the digital phantom, and that's the CT image that we used for phase 2. And this is the workflow basically defined by the Image Biomarker Standardization Initiative. Okay, and this is the workflow we're going to investigate today. And we'll go deeply into the details here, such that I hope afterwards, if you want to take your code and benchmark it according to the IBSI benchmark results. If you want to code it yourself, then you will have an idea about the little details involved in each of these steps here. So as we said, there's this basically workflow of getting into a prediction models and getting to personalized treatment. And I want to reiterate that the IBSI focused in this first part here, computation of radiomics features defined by this workflow here, okay? So for now, let's try to break it down and go into all those steps here. this image data and conversion after images are acquired, basically, we need to take into account downstream for our calculations if what we have in hand, basically. Do we have definite or arbitrary intensity units? For example, if we acquire the city image, we'll have physical intensities, Hounsfield units. For PET, we can convert that to a standardized value, uptake value, such that we all have the same scale here, scale of intensities. But if we're playing and if we're analyzing MRI images, there's no units associated to that. So this has a consequence here, arbitrary intensity units, consequence about the features that we can later on extract. So this needs to be taken into account. Image post-acquisition processing. This was not benchmarked by the IBSI, sorry, but that's something to take into account also if we want to reproduce one model. Was there partial volume effect correction applied to PET images? Was there noise removal applied to any type of images? Was there, which is something very popular actually, which is very much needed in MRI, was there intensity non-uniformity corrections applied beforehand? So if yes, yeah, this needs to be reported in one study, ideally benchmarked as well, ideally using perhaps the same code. So this is what we mean here by the step of post-acquisition of the image processing. And then I'm going fast on these first steps because the main details are about, are in there here for the IBSI. Then we get to the point where we want to analyze the image from a given region of interest, right? And where segmentation is of the utmost importance to get overall the same results. Segmentation, okay, we understand that it's the process of defining in one image if, for example, for a tumor, if a given voxel belongs to the tumor or does not belong to the tumor. So there's many segmentation algorithms, and this challenge here, we've seen great improvements in terms of going towards automatic segmentation of head and neck tumors, which is great, which is very great. So manual, semi-automatic, automatic, it's not the scope of this talk. You've heard a lot about this here. So description of all those methods. Here we're going to focus on the steps themselves. So that's the definition, for example, of segmentation, and we'll get back to these types of schematics here to describe also the other steps involved in the IBSI workflow. And just another word on segmentation. Of course, we understand that it's really important to get accurate segmentation. There's been many works that defined that investigated and basically showed that segmentation accuracy is important, and that some radiomics features, depending on their nature, can be more or less sensitive than others to contouring variations. So in terms of radiomics analyses, it's a good idea to perform robustness analysis before starting, for example, building a prediction model. So discarding features that are non-robust for a given problem. Okay, non-robust, if I'm using MRI, the features that are non-robust may not be the same as the 4 features that are not robust for PET, for example. For different cancer type, it might be totally different. So discarding features that are not robust to segmentation is a good idea, is a good strategy for initiating a radiomics analysis. And then once we really start doing the radiomics work, okay, the radiomics feature extraction, we have segmentation defined. Thanks to all of those work into providing automatic segmentations, which can really help the workflow here. But once we have that, now the first real step in terms of image processing is the interpolation of our volume, imaging volume. Interpolation of our imaging volume in order to get isotropic voxel size. Okay, isotropic voxel size, because many different features here that we're defining needs to have the same distance in all space directions, in 3D space directions. So the first step really to have sensible imaging features is to do interpolation to get to isotropic voxel size. And just the process of doing image interpolation leads to differences between different software code, for example. So this is just one process that needs to be benchmarked, and that was benchmarked by the IBSI, for example. And the simple, I won't go too much into details, but simple, specific way of doing the interpolation, of aligning the original grid to the interpolated grid, differences in this respect can bring, we've showed it, great differences between the output interpolated results, output features calculated from these interpolated volumes, basically. So there's some guidelines that we've defined to define the interpolation process, basically involved in radiomics, where we recommend to align grid centers together. For more details, I'll be really happy to discuss about this afterwards. So different types of interpolation exist also, and this needs to be specified. Are we doing nearest neighbor interpolation, linear interpolation, cubic convolution? This needs to be defined, benchmarked, processed, and this is what the IBSI has done. And it's really important also in the slice axis original dimension to always use the actual distance between voxel centers in the DICOM reference frame. For MRI, especially, most often we encounter that, sometimes we encounter that in the slice dimension, there's a gap between slices. So the slice thickness is not the distance to use to calculate isotropic voxel size, but basically the slice spacing that needs to be taken into account. So that's something to take to keep in mind. Now we've defined also this resegmentation process, and again, a very important process. For example, in the case of CT imaging, let's say you have defined, for example, a first segmentation region of interest here, okay, defined by some expert or by some expert algorithm. The idea is to exclude intensities in this resegmentation process that would not be of interest simply for or only for radiomics analysis. Okay, for radiomics analysis, we may say, okay, now that the segmentation has been done, we want to remove those bone voxels, the voxels associated to bone or associated to air. Basically, we would like, for example, to provide a resegmentation range, a range of analysis between minus 500 and 400 Ansfield units. Great, that's one example. Another example is after interpolation, if you have negative values of SUV map, that's not physically possible. So you want to resegment to 0 to the infinity. So there's some little processes that can be done following interpolation and following segmentation. So that's the idea here of range resegmentation. There's also this process of intensity outlier filtering, basically that remove voxels that are considered to be outliers. And it's been shown that it results in more reliable texture measurements. So there's this process, okay, of segmentation, but the final math that can be used is one, for example, that remove outliers like here, like in MRI. And these two resegmentation processes are used. If these two are used, then we need to apply them in parallel. You apply them using the original intensity mask in parallel, and you take the intersection of the resulting masks, range of masks. Then I just want to point out again, we have this two different masks, resegmentation mask defined by the IBSI. There's the intensity mask and the morphological mask. Okay, the morphological mask is the one that we've been talking about at the beginning, the original one, the one that maintains the initial morphology. Okay, as defined by an expert algorithm, expert segmenter. Okay, so that's the original mask that we call the morphological mask. There's also, after range resegmentation, so the modification of the morphological mask, we define it as the intensity mask, the one that has been applied after range resegmentation. And this mask is used in, the intensity mask is used in the computation of all features. But as you can imagine, the morphological mask will be used in the calculation, for example, of morphological features. So it's important to keep these two masks into memory when doing calculations. Then we get to the process of almost going into feature calculation, ROI extraction, which is simply the process of, for example, defining, putting placeholder values for those voxels that are outside the region of interest in order to make calculations easier. Then we get to discretization, and another very important step. Image discretization basically reduces the original intensity dynamic range to a lower range of integer values. For example, if you have intensities in MRI, I don't know, going from, or for Hounsfield units, for example, going from -500 to 400 Hounsfield units, you may want to decide that you want to reduce this dynamic intensity range into something lower. Maybe you want to have in the end in your ROI only 64 intensity values. It's a crucial step actually to do it because it reduces the noise dependence of the calculated texture features. So it's a really important step. The thing is that we have to keep in mind is that the lowest bin always has to be set to a value of 1 in the workflow defined by the IBSI, not 0. We decided to set that to 1 to remove confusion. And then we define two ways of doing discretization here. We can either say that we want a fixed bin number. So the total number of bin is fixed for all ROIs, meaning that no matter what the range of intensities in different ROIs, different patients, for example, we set it to 64. So what it introduces a normalization effect, but it does not conserve the relationship between image intensity and physical meaning, for example, Hounsfield units. But features can be compared across different ROIs because they all have the same number of grid levels. Then another way of doing discretization, it would be to say, using the fixed bin size technique, FBS, that the bin size, the width, is fixed for all ROIs. So now the total number of bins becomes dependent on the maximum intensity, okay, of that you have in your region of interest. So not all ROIs regions of interest will have the same number of bins, but all the bin widths will be the same for all different ROIs, all different patients. So that actually conserves the relationship between image intensity and physical meaning, meaning we say that between -500 and -450 HUs, that's always refers to a discretized bin of 1. Then -450 to -400, discretized bin of 2. So there's a direct relationship between the physics and the bin number, basically. But this relationship is conserved if and only if the minimum value of the first bin, for example, -500, is fixed for all ROIs. Okay, fixed for all ROIs. For example, one ROI may start at -400. Well, bin 1 would not start at -400. It starts at, we said, -500. So that means that for the patient that starts at -400, for example, the first bin number could be 3 and would not have bin number of 1, would not have bin number of 2, for example. So this is really important, and when it's not respected, can lead to some differences, and obviously huge differences in feature calculations. So there's that concept of definite intensity, arbitrary intensities, resegmentation range, discretization. All those interlinked processes are basically they're all linked, as I said, and they're described, and how to handle them are described in the reference manual. And yes, that gives you guidance about how to handle all this. Then once we have done all this image processing, because this was image processing, now we get to feature computation. Now we get to this list of 173 features coming from 11 different categories, non-texture features that we call six category of texture features. You can go see the IBSI 1 reference manual for more details. Well, there's 6 different matrix types, basically texture features with different matrix types, grid level co-occurrence matrix, grid level run length matrix, and the process is always the same, right? You looked at 26 voxel connectivity for a 3D volume that has been pre-processed. From this volume, you calculate a matrix, a 2D matrix. So this matrix of 6 different types, so 6 different matrices, and from these matrices, you calculate different features. For example, a feature you can calculate is from the gray level co-occurrence matrix, where you look in different directions how many voxels, let's say, of intensities 1 and 2, how many times they are neighbors in all directions, basically. So that there's that concept of directionality. Okay, you can have you can get a GLCM, a matrix, only for the direction 45 degrees, or you can get you can sum up the GLCM for all the directions into just one GLCM. And this concept of directionality using 2D slices or 3D full volumes. So basically in the 3D volumes, there's 26 directions. This leads to different ways of volumetric approaches, basically. Different ways, 6 different ways of calculating the same texture feature. Okay, so this is clearly well defined in the IBSI reference manual, how to basically the different possibilities for all these different processes, going from 2D to 2.5D to 3D, okay, with full merging here of directional, for example, matrices that I've just discussed about. So this is an important detail that needs to be taken into account and reported when for a given radiomic study. Now that we've described all this, how did we manage to benchmark all this? Well, as I said, we first benchmarked just the feature calculations, okay? Feature calculations without any image processing using this small digital phantom where no image processing was required. Just 4 different gray levels in there and a very small phantom of 5 by 4 by 4 voxels, okay? Then, once this process was done, then we defined different configurations for image processing. Now that we're confident that the feature calculation was benchmarked and done properly, we went further ahead and defined different interpolation procedures, different resegmentation range, different ways of doing discretization for the same image here, a CT image of a lung patient. So that was phase 2 of IBSI chapter 1. And over time, we managed, as you can see here, to get towards benchmark results, where towards a consensus of first in phase 1 feature calculation over time. Okay, we ended up with having that's a number of institutions, the number of matches. So here we had greater than 10 institutions that matched, that had 50% of features matching. The important thing is that we managed to have at least between 6 and 9 institutions that matched almost 200 of the features for phase 1 and to 85% for phase 2. So that's the iteration over time that led us to a better consensus between features calculated from phase 1 and phase 2. This is all described basically in the radiology manuscript. So in general, summary of recommendations here. Time is running out, sorry about that. I will accelerate a little bit. Summary of recommendations in terms of IBSI chapter 1. The general recommendations are about, obviously, and I urge you to have a look at this beautiful reference manual, but the idea is to calibrate your code, your new software with IBSI 1 benchmark tests. That would mean you look at the results, the benchmark tests that are online. Okay. You look at the procedure to get these to those results. Okay, it's about taking the digital phantom, calculating features, about taking the CT image used by IBSI-1, calculating all the features. The idea is for you to have matching results with those benchmark results defined by many institutions that participated to IBSI-1. And once this is done, very well, perfect. Now your code is kind of compliant to IBSI-1 characteristics, IBSI-1 benchmarks. Then the idea would be to do your radiomics analysis, follow IBSI-1 nomenclature, and reporting guidelines. So to provide all computational details, you can decide to do linear interpolation or cubic interpolation as long as it's detailed into your manuscript, for example, or your research study, so that others can reproduce it. It would both types of interpolation or discretization processes would have been benchmarked in step 1 here, but now the idea is to have a set of reporting guidelines to make sure to provide all computational details in a given study. Then try to, obviously, in general, always compare radiomics against tumor volume and existing prognostic factors that could give you a clear baseline. I would recommend to always share data, programming code, models, so that reproducibility of our results is facilitated such that we can go towards clinical translation as fast as we can, help patients as fast as we can. Another great recommendation, I think, is to follow the FAIR guidelines in your research. All research objects, reproducibility of a given study, all those objects need to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. In terms of specific recommendations, I would recommend to do 3D radiomics analysis unless the problem suggests otherwise. Use aligning grid centers for interpolation. Performing full merging of texture matrices, so 3D full merging unless the problem suggests that there's a direction which is that should be focused on. To not use the fixed bin size discretization with images that have arbitrary intensities, or if a resegmentation range is not defined. And to optimize texture features using many different extraction parameters, different bin numbers, bin size. I recommend you to try out different bin size and bin numbers that can lead to different radiomics features, texture features that could be more optimal for different bin numbers, for example. And then I wanted to finish with IBSI Chapter 2. As I said at the beginning, IBSI-1 is done, published, and we hope that people can use the work of IBSI-1 to benchmark their code. And then recently, in the month of June, we launched IBSI Chapter 2, which is about benchmarking imaging filters in radiomics. So this is the same process as you've seen before, but we added this image filtering part here. Because we know that if we enhance those images or process those images with Laplacian of Gaussians, loss filters, wavelets filters, Gabor filters, it could lead to important characteristics out of those images. So many a time we see radiomic studies that perform linear filtering and that discover important patterns. So our idea is to benchmark the computation of those filters. And we plan to obtain the iterative process that took almost 2 years, the iterative process of going towards a consensus for IBSI-1. Now for IBSI-2, we intend to get our first set of results this October 15th. And then we're going to iterate, I hope, for not 2 years this time, but a little bit faster, so that we can iterate and converge towards a consensus about image filtering and computation of radiomics filters after image filtering. So in final words, I believe standardization and full transparency on data and methods are the keys to a faster translation of radiomics to the clinical environment. IBSI provides an opportunity to work towards standardizing all this process as a community. I hope you're convinced to use the IBSI-1 benchmarks to calibrate your radiomics software, and IBSI-2 work is ongoing, and I invite you to participate to it. IBSI-2, please visit the IBSI website right here. if you want to participate to the phase 2. So all the instructions, new reference manual for IBSI 2, for which a core team member has worked putting this in. A very comprehensive manual describing all the processes we're using for filtering in radiomics. So all the details are here to participate to IBSI 2. Here's a link to the IBSI 1 radiology paper and the IBSI 1 reference manual, which is needed basically to participate also to IBSI IBSI 2. So thank you very much for your attention. It was a pleasure talking to you. And have a good day. Thank you very much.